For half a century now, through wind and rain and hail and snow, it's flickered its solemn duty. Grief and hope made tangible in the glow of a flame. Lighting it was the last public duty Mrs. Kennedy had that sad day. Just where the First Lady got the idea for the eternal flame isn't known for sure. Perhaps it was their trip to Paris or a later visit to Gettysburg. Either way, author Robert Poole says the First Lady knew it had to be here.
She wanted Arlington so that President Kennedy would belong to the nation.
Arlington's Section 45 wasn't meant as a presidential resting place. After all, the hill is pretty steep. But that hill mattered. It was a favorite spot of the president's. He had visited Arlington House, that old mansion atop that hill, just 8 months before Dallas. And while admiring the view from up here, he said something that day that was chillingly prophetic.
Kennedy just stood and drank in the scene. He said, "I could stay here forever."
Really?
He's here now.
So much about that weekend was unexpected. But less than 24 hours before the burial, the superintendent of Arlington got a call that surprised everyone.
And it's somebody from the military district of Washington saying, "Well, Mrs. Kennedy wants an eternal flame." And he basically said, "What's an eternal flame?"
With the clock ticking, the job fell to a group of Army engineers, notably Colonel Clayton Lyle and Lieutenant Colonel Bernard Carroll.
My dad had a way of being very cool under pressure.
Carroll's daughter, Kathy, remembers it was a Sunday. Every hardware store was closed. So, Carroll and Lyle improvised. Their idea? A Hawaiian luau torch.
I can just see my dad thinking, well, this will work.
But how was Mrs. Kennedy going to light it? Well, Kathy's father had an answer for that, too. This.
I don't know what I was expecting, but I think I was expecting something a little fancier.
It's definitely just a simple piece of wire with just a piece of cloth that was doused in kerosene, I believe. Doesn't have to be fancy to work.
And work it did. Bill Morris watched that lighting unfold.
So it was a day pretty much just like this.
It was a very similar day, sunshine, bright blue skies, some clouds.
A member of the Army's Old Guard, Morris was part of the grim procession to Arlington that day and was later assigned the duty of guarding the flame as the nation came to pay its respects.
And in the morning, the gates, they'd open the gates and it was like a flood of humanity coming up the roads. And nobody was prepared for that.
Least of all the flame itself, which, try as it might, wasn't exactly eternal.
If you were assigned to the eternal flame, you had to have a lighter in your pocket. Every time the wind blew, it went out.
It was even extinguished by a nun who accidentally blessed it with too much holy water. But eventually the flame was replaced by a more permanent, more reliable system that lasted more than 40 years, until last spring.
We got 5.
When the flame underwent its first major renovation. Although new, it's still the same idea those engineers had all those years ago.
What do you think he'd think that it's still there? His task was to make an eternal flame,
And it's eternal. That means forever.
It may have been a last-minute addition, but Mrs. Kennedy's simple idea has offered eternal measures of solace and peace ever since.
You know, one of the first things that happens in Genesis is let there be light, light out of the darkness. There's some aspect of that at work, I think, in her decision to have an eternal flame here. Maybe it was purely instinctive, but it, I think, has had the effect she wanted it to have, and then some.